Hey guys, this is another boss video guide going over bosses for Season of Mastery Molten Core. These guides are pulled straight from the strategies that the hardcore community used in order to kill bosses in Molten Core with zero or at least very limited number of deaths. So today's boss fight is going to be Magmadar. Magmadar has a couple changes in Season of Mastery. Number one, and the most important one, is that every 20 or 30 seconds, Magmadar is going to spawn 2 Corehound adds. These Corehound adds are very similar to the Corehound packs leading up to Magmadar. So when they are spawned, there's 2 of them at a time. If you were to, for whatever reason, kill one of those 2 and not kill the second one fast enough, they would then res one another. And so throughout the fight, as these spawn, if you decide that you want to kill the adds instead of focusing down Magmadar, you need to make sure that they die at the same time, which means that you need to kill them before new ones spawn and can run over and res the dead ones. So it's just an extra mechanic with adds on this fight. The other main change is that the Lava Bomb ability that Magmadar has is cast much more frequently. Means that there's a lot more of the flaming poop, as people describe it. The other things that you probably need to be aware of for Magmadar is that Magmadar has the frenzy ability still. So having hunters set up with a trank shot rotation and making sure that you are getting rid of that as quick as possible, it's just going to mitigate damage on the tank. And then there's a fear that goes out on Magmadar. If you are on Alliance, having your Dwarf Priests pre-pop fear wards on as many people as possible. If you are Horde, Shamans putting down Tremor Totem. Warriors can break this with Berserker Rage, and then Undead can break it with Will of Forsaken. There are certain PvP trinkets that can also break this fear. So the hardcore community, our Magmadar fight, we have a slightly different comp than we do for Lucifron and Gehennis. We actually drop one of our tanks and bring in an extra hunter, and we drop one of our mages and bring in an extra physical DPS. So we brought in an extra DPS ward. Less tanks than we use on Lucifron and Gehennis, which makes sense because those fights have 4 adds. On Magmadar, you can get 4 more adds, but you can have tanks tanking multiple of those dogs with relative ease as long as you make sure they're positioned well and you make sure that you have healers watching them. And if you have any way for those tanks to drop bleeds, that can be pretty essential to making sure that those tanks don't die just from the stacking bleed effect from those adds. So here you can see there's a lot going on this diagram, but the important thing to note here is that the main tank grabs Magmadar pretty close to where it initially is standing, faces it against the wall. Then we have 2 off tanks positioned here at the 1 and the 2. As soon as dogs spawn, each of those off tanks grabs a dog, and they pull that dog all the way south down here, and they pull it to a 3rd tank, which we use a feral tank. And that feral tank is going to grab both of those dogs, and then those 2 off tanks are going to come back towards the boss. Those 2 dogs will every once in a while kind of drop threat and run back towards Magmadar. So those 2 off tanks are doing a couple things. They are picking up new dogs when they spawn, and they're also helping corral the dogs if and when they do get loose. They're making sure that these dogs are tanks far enough away that these tanks never have to deal with the fear, and so that the healers on these tanks never have to deal with the fear. The rest of the raid is spread out pretty well. Melee are obviously positioned behind Magmadar. You want to do your best, at least at the start of the fight, to have your melee spread out as much as they can around the back 180 degrees of Magmadar. That way, as Magmadar starts shooting the fire, they are able to then move and condense themselves so that they are not all standing in the fire every time that it gets thrown out. Like I said, the rest of the range is sort of just spread out in this fight. Those that can be far enough away to outrange the fear should be. We do have fear ward assignments because we are playing Alliance and because most of our priests are dwarf. The big thing that we have set up is that the priests are trying to get fear wards out from the moment that Lucifron dies until the moment that we engage Magmadar. So typically a ton of people in the raid already have a fear ward. So this first fear ward column is actually once the fight has already began and the first fear has already gone out. So the priority after that first fear is for most of the priests to fear ward themselves, to get 1 on the main tank, and then to focus some on the DPS. We prioritized getting them out on the rogues, warlocks, and feral druid. Most of our mages and hunters were able to outrange the fear, no problem. Warriors are able to break the fear using Berserker's Rage. We prioritize the fear wards just to make sure that healers are good, and then the melee DPS that don't have any other way to break fear are also safe. So our focus was to DPS down Magmadar while we off-tank the dogs. This worked pretty well. Trank rotations are pretty standard, no issues there. Once Magmadar is dead is when most of the deaths have happened on this fight from what I have been able to see from other guilds doing it. I think a lot of that is just the boss dying and healers not paying attention to their healing assignments anymore. There's still fire all over the place. Flaming Poo is still dealing damage to anybody that's near it. The off tanks are still getting stacking bleeds. So once Magmadar dies, the whole raid needs to transition over here and kill the dog ads, and they need to kill them all at the same time, otherwise they will res one another. So if one dies super early, the others will then res it and it will come back at full health. So it's very similar to the trash packs that you fight before actually getting to Magmadar. There isn't much more to Magmadar than this. It's actually a very simple and straightforward fight. I would say it's probably easier than Lucifron as long as you have good coordination handling these dog ads and making sure that you have some ways to mitigate the stacking bleed effect on the off tanks. The main consumable for this fight is greater fire protection potions. There's no need for anything extra like restorative pots or anything like that. Just make sure, if you can, have everybody pre-pop a greater fire protection potion before the fight. If you have the time for people to pop one and then wait 2 minutes so that people have a potion cooldown off when you start the fight, that's probably the best way of going about doing this. Just DPS the boss down, kill the boss, kill the ads, get the loot, and get out. So here is our actual Magmadar fight. This was from our 10 out of 10 run with the hardcore community where we full cleared Molten Core on 1 life characters. See, we use a hunter to pull and get Magmadar in the exact position on the diagram, and then everybody starts spreading out. We get rank shots going there. The first fear goes out. The melee DPS are already dealing with the fire spawning on top of them. But for the most part, it's very simple and straightforward. The off tanks are waiting for those first dogs to spawn, and there they are. They are going to immediately pick those up, and you're going to see them dragging them south. The rest of the raid is just continuing to focus down Magmadar. The melee, again, are just dealing with that fire poop that's spawning behind it. Hunters are trying to move their pets, get them out of it. At this point in the fight, it's just DPSing down the boss. There's not much more to it. Trank shots are still going out on a rotation. Luckily, we had 4 hunters with Trank Book by this time, so we just assigned 2 hunters per trank. You technically only need 2 hunters in order to keep Frenzy completely off the table for Magmadar. So every trank shot, every hunter that you have with trank shot, you can just add them into that, 2-player rotation. So you can double up, or you can have people assigned to just sit and wait. Magmadar just gets absolutely wrecked right here. We almost actually beat it before the second set of ads come out. You'll see again, those off tanks were back in position. They're grabbing these second set of ads and they're dragging them south. Our tank that has the ads, that was tanking 2 of them at the beginning, is Grace for Days here. You can see he has pretty low bleeds, so he was able to mitigate most of the stacking bleeds throughout the fight, even though he was tanking multiple ads. As soon as the boss dies, everyone transitions over here and we start focusing down these Boarhound ads. And you want to make sure that you kill all of them at the exact same time. Very simple, very straightforward fight. One of the easier fights in Season of Mastery. Again, Magmadar is one of the earlier bosses in Molten Core, so when we talk about changes for Season of Mastery, there's not a lot going on. As we move farther in, there's going to be more interesting things. Gehennis will be the next boss that I talk about. It's another one that doesn't have very many changes. Once we get beyond Gehennis, the boss fights are going to get a bit more interesting, and the hardcore community had to come up with some maybe off-the-wall strategies, maybe things that don't seem that off the wall, but you wouldn't necessarily do in a normal guild if you weren't worried about deaths. So make sure you come back and check out the boss guides as I continue through this. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and as always, happy hunting.